I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. Many companies are seeking to develop non-opioid treatments for pain, but Persica Pharmaceuticals may be taking a surprising approach for chronic low back pain. The company's lead experimental therapy for the condition is an antibiotic. That may sound odd, but it turns out that about half of chronic low back pain cases are due to bacterial infections that occur after herniation of the spinal disc or injury. We spoke to Steve Ruston, CEO of Persica, about the need for new approaches to chronic low back pain, the company's experimental targeted intradiscal antibiotic injection, and the need to educate physicians about the role infection can play in the condition. Steve, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. It's very good to speak with you. Thank you.
We're going to talk about chronic low back pain, Persica, and its non-opioid experimental therapy. We've recently featured a few companies working to develop new types of pain medications, but Persica may be the most surprising of those. Let's start with lower back pain. How big a problem is this?
Well, back pain in general is a huge issue, not just for patients and the medical profession, but in terms of the cost through disability, inability to work, and other things like that. So it's a very serious problem. And as you, I'm sure, know, many of those patients have issues with back pain, including moderate to very severe pain, for many years. And of course, that causes all sorts of problems for them and their lives and work and family. So it's an enormous problem.
Is there any way to quantify it in terms of numbers or in terms of dollars spent?
Well, I think we've done a little bit of market research, in particular in respect of the United States, and our approach is trying to help people with moderate to severe chronic back pain, and there are probably, according to referenced estimates, somewhere between 5 and 8 million patients like with that problem in the United States. Our drug will not help all of those. But a significant percentage we think may well benefit. Of course, there are many more who have lesser levels of pain, and depending on what's causing it, sometimes that can be treated, sometimes it will go away, sometimes it progresses to a more serious condition. So across the spectrum, it's a very large number.
And how much of an unmet need is it? I mean, there are tons of treatments available that people use for back pain today.
Yes, so we can come on to the fact that the founders of Persica are medical professionals who've either been working in academic medical research, trying to help new approaches to back pain, or surgeons or chiropractors, and they will say that for many patients, it's a really serious problem. And unfortunately, many of the approaches trying to assist this either don't work very well or don't work for very long, or they don't work at all. And what we were trying to do was come up with a novel approach. And this is where we're so excited, because our approach actually treats one of the underlying causes of back pain, not just the symptoms, which is a more frequent approach from other things that have been tried.
I do want to get into that, but before I do, what are the limitations of existing approaches?
You know, people have been treated with all sorts of approaches, from physiotherapy or rest, They are treated with different levels and increasing levels of analgesia, including opioids, as I'm sure you know. And ultimately, you can progress to more invasive surgical procedures, up to and including spinal fusion. And clearly, those are not options that one would want to undertake lightly. The spinal fusion operations are very expensive. They may have some benefit and can have some benefit, but other approaches, as I say, either don't work for very long or they don't work very well because you're addressing the symptoms, not the underlying cause. That's our perspective on this.
And this is such a common problem that so many people have experienced that I suspect it's easy to dismiss the impacts this could have on someone's life. How life limiting can chronic back pain be?
Our founders who've treated with antibiotics, but not using the approach that we're now using in Persica, um, they've seen the effect over many years of people who are seriously impacted. Some of the worst cases, they can't work, they can't necessarily reach down to tie up their shoelaces, they can't play with their children, and they may have to live with this condition for many years, and in many cases, the pain is with them 24/7 or all their working hours and waking hours, and it's a huge impact if you've got to that level of severity and nothing you've tried has worked.
You mentioned antibiotics. This is why I said this might be the most surprising of the recent discussions we've had around pain, because I don't think most people associate chronic low back pain with bacterial infections, but that can be the cause of the problem. Can you explain how intradiscal infections cause chronic low back pain?
So our proposal is that in a healthy disc, it's a system that is avascular, and bacteria that circulate in your blood or in your mouth can't access it. If a disc becomes herniated or damaged, the body repair mechanisms can include vascularization, and our proposition is that that's where a relatively low level of bacteria, and we know what the species is in the main, can get in, and if the body then repairs itself, and usually herniations can be repaired either by the body or by surgery, you can end up with a relatively low number of bacteria that live very happily in the disc. And over a period of time, they will cause bone edema, inflammation, and the main bacteria in question has a property of releasing propionic acid. So you're facilitating bone degradation, and that's why the pain doesn't go away, because it's just sitting there eating away, causing the effects I've just described. And that's our proposition for why the patients that we're trying to help have this condition for a long time.
What would a physician need to do to determine whether your treatment would be appropriate for a patient?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, as I've just said, there are relatively small numbers of bacteria localized in the spine. So, unlike typical or normal bacterial infections, it's not really possible to go and get a sample out and culture it. Um, so the way we diagnose our potential patients right now is a detailed review of their pain history, trying to remove any other obvious sources of chronic pain. So if you have a tumor or something, or scoliosis, for example, you would be ruled out. But the key way of doing it right now are very distinctive images on MRI scans. And what we've learned is, and what our founders discovered, was that there's a very high likelihood with certain imagery that is indicative of an infection, and these represent themselves with modic changes. Modic changes describe the type of imaging that I've just spoken about. Those changes have been known for a long time, but it wasn't really until our founders' academic research, which was done in Denmark, came along, and they postulated the link between such images and the presence of a bacterial infection, and we've gone forward on that basis.
Your experimental therapy, which is PP353, consists of three different components. Can you explain what each component is and what its function is?
Sure, I can. So the proposition is that you want to deliver a high localized dose of a suitable antibiotic to the specific site of infection, again determined by MRI, but without large systemic dosing. For obvious reasons, you want to dose the maximum bang for the buck with minimum collateral impact. What we came up with was the use of a well-known, well-established antibiotic delivered as a fine powder in a liquid vehicle using what's known as a thermosensitive gel. This is a common type of liquid for administration using the injections. And the liquid has the property of turning from a mobile liquid at cold room temperature or normal room temperature. When it warms to body temperature, it becomes very viscous. It turns into almost like a toothpaste when it has the presence of our antibiotic. And the idea is that you deliver it by injection to the site of where we see the infection, deliver a depot of antibiotic. And because it's designed not to leak out too quickly, we have shown that you get several days coverage with one injection at a therapeutic level. So it's a very novel way of delivering an antibiotic to a specific site. The third component is an imaging agent. These injections are done under fluoroscopy, and the imaging agent is there to assist the surgeon or the radiologist to ensure, firstly, they're putting the needle in the right place, and that they can detect when the disc is full. So you don't want to inject more than the disc can take. So it's a three component combination, as you said, and that's a unique way of doing this. And although we're using an antibiotic that's been in clinical use for a long time, that component mixture and the way that it's used is unique to Persica, and that's the basis of our intellectual property. And we have granted patents on this in all the major territories.
What's known about it from studies you've conducted to date?
So, firstly, we have now finished a phase 1b human trial. Previously to that, we did some modeling work in sheep, where we showed that it was effective against sheep that had bacteria in their discs. But when we went to the human trial, we wanted to show, I guess, three things. Firstly, that it was safe and well tolerated. Spinal injections are extremely common procedure. All sorts of things are injected into people's spine for various reasons, with different degrees of success or lack of success. So the surgical procedure is simple. There were no issues with that. As I said earlier, the amount of drug we're delivering is low compared to the usual use of this generic antibiotic. Um, and there were no adverse events from the treated group of any significance at all. With spinal injections, you might get a little bit of short-term, a few hours of mild bruising or something like that, or mild pain, but it really is trivial. None of the radiologists or surgeons that participated in the trial had any issues. So it's safe and well tolerated. Secondly, we wanted to demonstrate that the proposition is by using this combination, you would get extended coverage. Our belief is if you use a normal IV dose of an antibiotic, it would go into the disc and out again very, very quickly and wouldn't be there long enough to kill the bacteria. And we were able to show that there was an extended coverage between 4 and 5 days with one injection. We set out to mimic pretty much the way the antibiotic is used in its normal therapy, by giving somewhere between 8 and 10 days. So on that basis, we decided to conduct the study with 2 injections given 5 days apart, 4 to 5 days apart. And we were able to show that those 2 injections did in fact give us 8 days therapeutic levels of coverage of the antibiotic. Obviously, the trial was also then, most importantly, aimed at showing that it had clinically and statistically significant reductions in pain and disability using standard scoring methods. I'm very happy to say the trial did, in fact, deliver that outcome, and the primary and the secondary goals of the study were met. So the patients who were treated with this had a differential effect compared to those on the sham or placebo injections where they didn't receive antibiotic. And many of the patients had a very significant reduction in pain, consistent with what our founders have experienced using oral antibiotics. So we're very happy with that outcome. You may say, well, why don't you just give people oral antibiotics? But the reason you don't do that, or we don't think that's a way for future medicine, is because it's very, very hard, and we've done some experiments to show this, to get a sufficient level of antibiotic through that mechanism delivery into the spine, and therefore you need very, very high doses for 100 days of antibiotic to get the effects that our founders demonstrated. We didn't see that as being a good thing. There are high levels of side effects, particularly gastrointestinal. You also have problems with patient compliance, so they don't always want to stay on a course of treatment that's causing those effects for 100 days, and you run the risk of significantly increasing antibiotic resistance. So for all of those reasons, we considered that to be great academic research, but not the basis of a modern medicine. We think 353 has the potential to be a very serious player in this, um, because on the study that we've completed, it works. And the approach is novel, and the distinguishing thing, as we've touched on earlier, is that it addresses an underlying cause, not just the symptoms.
And what's the development path forward?
So the next stage would be to progress this into registrational studies. We believe, for a number of reasons I probably haven't got time to go into here, that the next stage should be 2 phase 3 studies. The drug has been in clinical use for many, many years, so its safety and toxicology profile is very well known. The other 2 components in the medicine are also in clinical use in other medicines. So there isn't a requirement to do extensive toxicology, um, because of the uh, specific nature of the formulation. It's neither possible nor necessary to do a lot of variation on the components, or indeed dose ranging. I haven't got time to go into all of that here, but we think there's a compelling case now for using the 2 injections that we've demonstrated such good results with at phase 1b, to progress to registrational studies, and that's our plan. We've already been talking to regulatory agencies in Europe, and we'll be shortly discussing this with the FDA, with a view to designing the phase 3 trials that need to come next. So that's the clinical development program in a nutshell.
Is the company planning to do this on its own?
Well, so Persica is, you may know, it's a small UK-based biotechnology company. We are now looking for a suitable partner or partners, both to provide clinical development expertise to complement that which we already have, and financing. You obviously will be aware that doing phase 3 trials compared to a phase 1 or phase 2A is a step change in terms of number of patients and therefore funding. So we've got a dual track approach to find a partner to assist us with much larger clinical trials, and the funding to underpin that. So that's key focus for the company at the moment.
Persica was founded in 2013 to create an injectable antibiotic to be delivered at the
Yeah.
site of infection in the vertebral disc. Not to take anything away from your progress to date, but why has it taken 12 years to get to this point?
It's a really good question, and I do have an answer to that. And sometimes I think about that question as well. So, firstly, we were set up in 2013, but we only got our first funding, limited then, to enable research to start. That didn't happen until the following year. And the first years of our existence, we spent researching what would be the appropriate antibiotic to go into such an injection that eventually became developed. And this wasn't the first program that we had. We spent a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, on a different approach, albeit with a similar intended outcome. And while we got some way down the track on that one, ultimately it wasn't progressible. So we haven't been working on 353 since 2013. Probably we started limited lab development work, I would guess, towards the end of 2016 or early 2017. And we went through all the stages, the usual stages of lab research, small scale development, small scale up. Um, and then we went into preclinical development. We had to develop our own animal model. I think I referenced, we developed a sheep model of infection. Nobody had one of those to the best of our knowledge. We had to do that. We did that with the Royal Veterinary College in the UK. And then we went through the various regulatory approaches and applications. We got approval to do our clinical trial, but as I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear, uh, we were seriously impacted, like many other companies, with the COVID issues. That the COVID problem has probably cost us 2 years in time. Certainly in the UK and other European countries that we were working in, virtually nothing was done in terms of new clinical studies in state hospital settings during 2020, and the knock-on effect of the backup of delayed patient procedures continue to have significant effects, particularly in the UK, but also we had hospitals signed up to work with us in Spain and France, and we had the same issues there. So a combination of we didn't really start on this in 2013, and if you take the COVID delay out of it, then I think the development timeline's been pretty reasonable for a small company. And we wish that the problems of 2020 and 21 never happened, but we're not the only company that experienced that.
Persica doesn't appear to have a pipeline behind your 353. Is there a pipeline, and is there a vision for a company beyond the experimental therapy you're working on?
Again, it's a really good question. So the short answer is we do not have a pipeline right now. I think there is potential to explore using 353 to widen the number of chronic back pain patients. I mentioned that in the MRI imaging that we use, we look for modic changes. There are um, more than one type of those changes. We are trying to address modic type 1 changes, which is a watery edema. And in the experience of our founders and chiropractors, they are the most painful. But it is entirely possible that those with modic 2 changes, which is like a fatty edema, which may have may also be treatable with this. We haven't treated modic 2 patients, so I think the first call would be to see if we can expand the current patient population. Wider than that, it's not impossible that infections elsewhere may be helped by 353. We do know, for example, that in certain surgeries, hip replacements, for example, um, antibiotics are put in there as a prophylactic, and it's not impossible to conceive a role for something like 353 in that. But we're not working on that. We're a small company. We have to stay focused on chronic back pain. But even within that, I think there are options to expand the patient groups that we're trying to treat and what we've been treating to date. And that's probably where we would start. If we were a much bigger company, we might be able to run some of these things in parallel, but for somebody like us, that's simply not
And how
possible.
well understood is intradiscal infection as a cause of chronic low back pain? And for the therapy to be successful, do you see the need for a plan for physician education?
Huge need for education. If you go back to our medical research founders published a pivotal clinical study using oral antibiotics, and that was published in 2013. It actually generated worldwide publicity because back pain, as we touched on at the start, is such a major issue. And we put a press release out recently with the results of our trial, and that's had a huge amount of interest also. However, when they published, there was a lot of pushback. In 2013, the idea of bacteria in the disc was certainly not universally accepted. There were quite a few skeptics, I should say, or people who weren't persuaded this was a real thing. Um, the medical world or the surgical world can be quite conservative, as I imagine you know. Um, and it did get quite a lot of challenge, I think, then. Uh, there was allegations, well, if you found bacteria the only way you've been able to identify the bacteria is to take tissue from people who've had discectomies. The spines have been removed and bacteria extracted from those excised discs. And it was alleged, well, if you found anything in there, it's poor surgery. That's been comprehensively disproved if you look at the correct studies using the appropriate microbiology. Nothing to do with us, that's independent of us. And the answer, therefore, is bit by bit, there have been other studies that show oral antibiotics can benefit certain groups of patients. Um, we published our preclinical studies, and we think our first human clinical trial data is very compelling. We've gone out to a number of key opinion leaders. We have four such individuals in the United States, extremely eminent in their field. You can see all the names on our website, and they've been persuaded of this for some time, or they wouldn't lend their name and reputation to our company. Um, but we are very clear that it will require a change in mindset and an education. But if you haven't got anything to offer patients that works very well, and the treatment is cheap and simple, we think there will be much less resistance in the future. We think this will get taken up, but you're probably going to need the phase 3 results to move that education process along. But again, if you talk to experts in back pain therapy, there are so few new options, and the market research that we did showed that, and very few that attempt to address the underlying cause, as we touched on earlier. So yes, education, but the cynics might say the best way to educate people is to show them a reduction in cost, and the cost of millions of people with back pain of different levels of severity is enormous. And if you can take away the need for expensive surgery for a significant portion of those, then the cost of this treatment and the benefit will become very clear. We took some independent advice from some of the US payers, and they were clear that if the results we've seen to date are replicated at phase 3, this will be very interesting for them, and we've always believed that to be the case. So we see a big market here, with credible estimates subject to the phase 3 data mirroring what we have already, and similar levels of benefit to those patients. Um, this is a multi-billion-dollar market, quite credibly. I think what we didn't touch on in too much detail, but just to give you a heads up, for those patients who respond, in many, many cases, certainly more than 50% of those who are responding, their back pain is essentially cured. I can use that phrase. There's an internationally recognized scoring system, and the best responders were right down at the bottom end of that scale. If you've had back pain for a long time and you're of a certain age, you're probably never going to be 100% pain-free, but you're pretty close to it with the best responders, and that's a reduction from people who've had, moderate to severe pain for a long time. So if we can demonstrate that on a larger scale, the effect, the speed of response, the ease of treatment, all of that will help the education process. But you're quite right to ask that question, because that's going to be one of the challenges. I mean, there's a particular problem in the UK, for example, that MRI availability is a lot lower in the healthcare system here compared to the United States or elsewhere in Europe, Germany and Scandinavia, for example. And one of the reasons, apart from lack of capacity, is they can have an MRI. What are you going to do with it? And our drug will provide an answer to that question.
You mentioned earlier that you need to raise funds to finance the continuation of studies, but how is the company financed to date, and what is the plan for raising additional capital?
Yeah, so to date, we've been entirely supported by private individuals. In the early days, some of those were either patients uh, or would-be patients, or medical professionals. Um, and then we developed through the various networks, particularly initially in London, but we have an international base of investors, including the US now, all private individuals. A novel approach to back pain. I don't want to make it sound flippant or easy, but it's a very compelling story, because above a certain age, most people have got back pain or know somebody with it. And if you can come forward with a credible medical story, we found people very receptive and very patient. So Persica is enormously grateful to its investor base, but we're going to need significantly greater funds going forward for obvious reasons, and we'll have to look at additional sources of finance for that. We'll have to see the best mix between our current shareholder base and new investors going forward. But we're now a long way down the track. When we started out, we had no people, no facilities, and no data, and that's clearly not the case now. So we don't underestimate the challenge, but the market potential here and the progress we've made to date means that we're realistically confident that we will secure that funding.
Steve Ruston, CEO of Persica Pharmaceuticals. Steve, thanks so much for your time.
It's been a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.